The next installment of the Legend of Zelda series has officially begun production according to the man himself, Eiji Onuma. What's more is Breath of the Wild's game director Hidemaru Fujibayashi made a statement saying they aren't sure if the next Zelda game will be a sequel or continuation, but he is very motivated and has lots of ideas. So it sounds like they have a lot more that they want to do with the Breath of the Wild engine. I see two likely scenarios, as well as I've got a bit of a wish list for the next game. Just a heads up, there will be minor spoilers, so if you haven't played Breath of the Wild yet, you might want to just watch this one later. But also, at the same time, if you haven't played Breath of the Wild yet, what the hell are you doing? Get off your ass and go buy yourself a Switch and play Breath of the Wild. So like I said, I see two scenarios for the next Zelda adventure. So this first scenario is that the next Zelda game will be a sequel to Breath of the Wild. Even after the DLC, they still left the ending of Breath of the Wild very open, and they would have plenty to work with from a story standpoint, with Link and Zelda rebuilding Hyrule, taking out the rest of Ganon's lackeys, etc, etc. They also have this huge open world with ruins strewn about everywhere that they could focus on rebuilding. The game could start a few years after the events of Breath of the Wild, and we could see Castletown rebuilt, smaller villages popping up, and a reborn Temple of Time. This would be a great way to give us the same overworld map, less work for them, and give us so much more to explore. I honestly wouldn't mind exploring Breath of the Wild Hyrule at all if it had smaller destinations with more things to do in each. They could remap things like enemy camps and the like to freshen things up a bit as well. So I think a sequel is very possible. They have a lot they can work with already, and I'm sure they have plenty of things they wanted to do with Breath of the Wild that they never got a chance to do. The second scenario is a brand new game with all of the assets of Breath of the Wild reused. Pretty much exactly what happened with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask was a new game with the same Link from Ocarina of Time, but they used all of the same characters and mechanics to build an entirely new game. They did have some brand new characters exclusive for Majora's Mask, but for the most part, a lot of the characters were just reused, renamed, and put in different situations. The exact same thing could happen with the Breath of the Wild engine. A brand new story and world, but all these same mechanics could be used, and all of these same characters could just show up in different roles around whatever land they decide to base the game in. This is the scenario I want to see the most. This would allow them enough freedom to take things from Breath of the Wild that worked and add more things that they might not have got to do before without any pre-existing restrictions. They could focus more on the story and have a bit of a smaller open world to explore with more meaningful secrets and discoveries. I think Breath of the Wild was an amazing game, but it still had the potential to be even better than it already is. So this kind of brings me to my wish list. Honestly, this is just me ranting about what I wanted to see in Breath of the Wild that I didn't get. I think Nintendo did a great job with Breath of the Wild's open world. Open world is a hard thing to do. Giving a big world to explore and fleshing it out with meaningful discoveries and interactions is not the easiest task. Not only does it take a lot of time, but it's also kind of difficult to have enough different things to make exploring worth it for the player. Open world usually means the world is going to be pretty big, which often means a lot of the time is spent traveling between destinations with not a lot happening. I find most open world games have huge worlds to explore, but there's just not enough to discover, and I'll often opt in for fast traveling as opposed to just walking from destination to destination so I don't miss anything. In Breath of the Wild, I only found myself fast traveling to keep myself on task. If I didn't, I'd get distracted along the way and I'd forget what I was doing in the first place. They made a massive open world and kept it interesting by having hundreds of Korok seeds, shrines, and items and weapons to discover and hoard for later use. This was brilliant and made exploring every nook and cranny pretty worth it, and it worked really well for this game. But this same brilliance also left me wanting a little bit more. I missed the cool, meaningful secrets in Zelda, like in Twilight Princess discovering the secret village, even though it was part of the story, and like in the original Zelda when players found out you can burn a bush and open up a new shop. Breath of the Wild had plenty of smaller hidden areas and chests to find, but they always led to the same thing: a Korok seed, a weapon, or an item, or a shrine. All of these things were great at first, but it quickly got predictable. Finding a chest just became a bit too commonplace, and I missed that sense of discovery that I had when I first started. Wind Waker, I think, nailed this. Having the world divided up into islands, each with their own secrets, was so much fun to explore, and I make mapping all of them a big part of any playthrough I do. The ocean between the islands was boring as hell, but each island was unique and had new puzzles and maybe even a chest to unlock. This kind of exploration is what made me fall in love with Zelda in the first place. So just imagine a game like Wind Waker, with islands all across the map boasting secrets and puzzles, and instead of ocean in between, we had an overworld like Breath of the Wild, with Korok seeds and shrines or similar things. This would take way too much work for a game as large as Breath of the Wild, but if Nintendo dialed it down and filled a slightly smaller world with more meaningful secrets and interactions, I think it could improve a lot upon what they accomplished with Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild had a severe lack of dungeons. Shrines were a really cool concept and a great way to make an open world game seem full like we just talked about a moment ago, but the big issue was none of them gave me that feeling I would get the first time I walked into a Zelda dungeon. This would have been fine if the Divine Beasts were actually dungeons as opposed to the lackluster and fairly simple puzzles that they are. The Divine Beasts were cool, but they were more or less just over-glorified shrines. Aside from the final trial in the DLC, which was fantastic by the way, we didn't get that dungeon experience in Breath of the Wild, which was a little disappointing. Especially considering the last console installment we had in the series, Skyward Sword, in my opinion has some of the best dungeons in the entire series. Skyward Sword absolutely nailed the dungeon side of things, whereas it lacked a lot on the overworld exploration. Breath of the Wild was the complete opposite. Exploring the overworld is amazing, but it lacked the dungeon side of things. Dungeons were always an event for me. I'd play until I got to a dungeon, and then I'd save and quit and leave it for another time because I knew it would take me a few hours. Growing up, I was always intimidated by dungeons, and I loved it. They were huge and challenging and had unique puzzles to the corresponding item that you would find there, and they always ended with a big awesome boss. Breath of the Wild was designed to be completely open to the player's choices. As soon as you left the Great Plateau, you could go anywhere and do any of the shrines in any order, because they didn't rely on anything more than what you already had, which is a big reason they didn't do item-specific dungeons. Which is fine and all, but I don't see why this meant they had to change the fact that dungeons were really even a thing at all. I don't think the shrines themselves were really the replacement for the dungeons. They could have had dungeons and shrines. The replacements were the Divine Beasts, and like I said, they were just simple and uninspired compared to the dungeons we've seen in the past. I wouldn't even really call them dungeons, they're just like large puzzles. The one thing they did have going for them though was the battles that took place beforehand. These were super refreshing and put a good spin on the traditional Zelda format. One of the most notable being the Vah Ruta battle, but they just weren't enough to replace the dungeon exploration that I really wanted from this game. Whatever the next game is going to be will be a good chance to bring back the traditional dungeons, even if it's only a few in between more shrine-like experiences. The story in Breath of the Wild was one of the better in the series. Exploring the relationship between Link and Zelda and getting to know the four champions was wonderful, and I think they did a really good job with the characters and their relationships with Link. The final scene from the DLC got me all choked up, and I loved every second of it. The problem is the story segments of the game almost took a backseat to the overworld exploration. Story segments came up too infrequently, and it made me want more, but there really wasn't a whole lot. The memory quests where you have to find certain locations to regain memories about Zelda added more, but these were all optional and weren't required for the overall story. So really, we get the four champions story sections and the bit of lead up to the Divine Beast puzzles, and then we get the final boss, and that's about it. The ending of Breath of the Wild was the real weak point of the story. It really didn't wrap up a whole lot, and having Ganon just as an angry cloud as opposed to a mysterious Gerudo man with an actual brain and an evil agenda made the end goal of the game pretty meh. I didn't really care about Ganon in this one. I had no real reason to fight him other than he's bad, go stop him. Honestly though, that's not really Breath of the Wild's fault as a whole, it's just the direction they decided to take things this time around. Going back to Skyward Sword, the game was really story driven and had one of my favorite stories in a Zelda game to date. I miss that kind of storytelling, and I think they could have done it without affecting the freedom you're allowed in Breath of the Wild. I really liked the emphasis on exploration, but I think for a Zelda game, the story is just as important as the exploration is, and I hope this is something they address in the next installment. There's one thought I keep coming back to when I think about the next Zelda adventure, and that is give the next Zelda game the Majora's Mask treatment. Put Breath of the Wild in the juicer. We've had the delicious fruit, and now I want you guys to squeeze all of the juice out so I can just enjoy the best parts. Despite Breath of the Wild being Game of the Year, there was a lot of rind and pulp that could have been removed to give us an even richer experience, and whatever the next installment is will be the perfect chance for Nintendo to drop the greatest game of all time. So just to be clear, I absolutely love Breath of the Wild. These are just some things that I definitely wanted to see that we didn't quite get this time around. But really, I'm going to be happy with almost anything that they're going to do in a Zelda game. Nintendo always has a way of making their games super fun, and I'm sure that trend will continue in the next Zelda game. Thanks for watching, everybody. Do you think the next Legend of Zelda game will be better than Breath of the Wild, or do you think it will kind of flop? Let me know in the comments, and click that little thumbs up button if you like clicking little thumbs up buttons. Oh, and also don't forget to subscribe or something, I guess. Thanks, Dad!